more than half a century, the BBC has captured the changing face of everyday life in Northern Ireland. It all seems so innocent today, but without these moments, something of who we are now would be lost forever. These are the archives, and those were the days.
It's completely invaluable to look back at film because they take us back to another time.
Hearing people talk about their lives, that's priceless, and we should be proud of the footage we have of our people talking about their lives.
Film in particular, because to actually drive down the streets when the terraced houses were coming down, it just gives you, it's like finding a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
In 1954, the BBC's foremost broadcaster, Richard Dimbleby, was dispatched from London to journey around what was then an unknown country to many viewers. What Dimbleby was searching for, down our highways and byways, was a traditional Ulster homestead.
Dimbleby himself is, fantastic. He's like an intellectual Billy Bunter. He's vast. There's a fantastic shot when he's walking down the steps in Belfast Castle with Joseph Tumilty. Absolutely fantastic.
Let's have a seat. Take the weight of your legs.
Then there's that very English, whatever you do when you're amongst the mad paddies, don't mention religion, politics, that kind of very English deference, not wanting to upset the natives, which you can't quite tell whether it's sarcasm or good manners.
Joe, well, what do you think I really ought to look for while I'm here? Well, now, Richard, that's hard for me to say, but I can tell you what not to look for. You don't need to tell me that, I know already. Religion and politics.
You just watch it and you think to yourself, poor Mr. Tumilty. He has been told that this legend is coming across from the BBC and he's about to dispatch him into the heart of darkness that is the Antrim Coast Road.
Well, I started off in good weather, but I can't say that the Riviera came to my mind on the Antrim Road.
It may not have been the Côte d'Azur, but this coast road led Dimbleby to an untarnished tableau of rural Ulster life. Locals gathered round the fire to enjoy music, share stories, and introduce viewers to a lifestyle free from the modern-day distractions of television, technology, and cosmetic dentistry.
The sound of a fiddle told me where I should find the Emerson farm and the Cayley.
The thing that I was really taken by were the smiles of the people. If you look at the smiles very carefully, they keep the lips down, and then now and again the lips slip back, and you see why they keep the lips down. Their teeth are terrible. There's one man, a young 18 or 19-year-old boy. When you look into his mouth, it's Stonehenge that you're seeing suddenly, very frighteningly.
Well, what about having a guest or two? I'll give us one of yours. All right. There's a wee white woman with a wee red nose. And the longer she sits, the shorter she grows. Now, he'll guess that one.
Oh, so that's a candle.
Ah, it's a candle, all right.
They're just doing what people have been doing for hundreds of years. It's only us who've now, because we've got TV and electricity, it's only us very recently who've stopped doing that and stopped living like that and have started living a completely different kind of life.
We invite you now to join our Northern Ireland viewers for a further edition of our television magazine, Ulster Mirror.
Away from the rosy picture of rustic living portrayed in Richard Dimbleby's journey was a looming housing crisis for most ordinary people living in Northern Ireland. The slums that were present in our towns and cities had remained unchanged for generations.
Places where people live merit some attention. Lots of us live in houses like this, and some of us in the Victorian this, and in little towns often in this. All very trim and indeed at times picturesque. But what about this? It was in a country town. Green fields were no distance away, but the garbage could have been accumulated in the big city. The slum terraces reeked of dilapidation and neglect. These were the worst we could find in Ulster.
It's important to sort of put into context just how bad the housing stock in Northern Ireland was. 100,000 houses, they reckoned, in 1945 were required to house the population in Northern Ireland. Now, put in context, they were only building 2,500 a year up until that point. So there was a serious problem that needed to be addressed. They agreed then, they set up the Northern Ireland Housing Trust, and they were given a quarter, 25,000 houses they were entrusted to build.
You see, the old houses are quite easy to knock down, while new houses are costly to build. Yet this sort of thing's happening more all over Ulster. This change from old standards to the new.
New standards would mean the demolition of the old way of life. Established neighbourhoods and much-loved street names would vanish off the map. However, not everyone was progressing up the housing ladder. In the mid-1960s, the BBC went to film with the families caught between a home and a hard place.
Take one. Take one.
All I want is a home for my husband, myself and children, and surely that's not too much to ask.
In all of those housing films, you had the people themselves talking directly to camera. That move during that period to people speaking for themselves is very, very important. It's come right through to the present day, where we have this almost a fetishization of liveness, where we need to be there on the spot and people telling us what happened. And that was the start of it in those films in the 1950s and 60s.
Well, I was 15, I was living in a two-bedroomed house. My husband was asleep on a chair bed, and I sleep on two chairs put together. Two of my babies sleeps with my mother and father, and another one sleeps in a cot. And I have no cot for the child, as I'm not able to put one up, and it sleeps in a small pram.
What's it like to live in this kind of situation?
It's terrible indeed.
I think the real strength of some of the archive material is seeing the actual women who were living in these houses.
Take one.
I can't begin to imagine what it must have been like for those women, but you see a real strength in them. You know, you see women who made it work somehow.
Scene 87, take three.
Unfortunately, when we look at films like this, 20/20 hindsight is a great thing. When we know what happened, one is able to say somebody should have seen that. But I think those conditions were so bad that somebody should have seen that.
Our house would have been very typical. We had my mother and father and then 12 children in a one-bedroom house. My mother and father slept in one bed with maybe the youngest in the house. And one of the other beds, there was 8 of us in the one bed. And it was like a question of, everybody turn around there, right? And then everybody had to get sort of like synchronised sleeping as opposed to synchronised swimming. And of course there was a bit of swimming as well, because when you're younger, when some of us were at the bed, our Brian says he slept at the shallow end.
Just as the old heart of the city began to change forever, BBC viewers were taken on a remarkable drive through the fading back streets of North Belfast. A drive designed to capture the once vibrant working class community that was about to disappear.
You must leave now, take what you need, you think will last. But whatever you wish to keep, you better grab it fast. Yonder stands your orphan with his gun.
I thought it was fantastic to see that somebody in the BBC had gone off at that time and literally drove around the streets, giving us a house by house, shop by shop, pub by pub view of an era.
Coming through, and it's all over now, baby blue.
Some of the shots where you're just seeing street after street and half demolished little back sheds, you know, with maybe corrugated iron roofs, and great swathes of a city that were just covered in really high density housing.
The empty-handed painter from your streets.
When you look back on it now, it's like a packed, dense kaleidoscope of life, you know, because everybody else's life was being lived on top of yours. You know, that kind of like intensified form of living. It led to a lot of advantages and a lot of disadvantages. But I must say, I look back on it fondly.
There was a great spirit in those little terrace streets, and there had to be, because the people were, I mean, people talk about poverty now. Poverty now is nothing to what people were living in then. People were living on nothing.
A new way of life would rise from the rubble. High-rise flats and large-scale housing estates would completely transform the urban landscape of Northern Ireland. Home would have a new name in the modern world.
What are we living for? Two-room apartment on the second floor. No money.
I can remember the first talk in the house around 1960. Heard talk about a new house, and Rathcool was mentioned. And it was just a big notion for you. They could have been saying Los Angeles. And then Turf Lodge was mentioned. Ballymurphy was mentioned. Divis Flats was mentioned. All these locations. My ma was particularly pushing my father to get somewhere new. I think that's probably how we ended up in Turf Lodge.
I think moving from a terrace of back-to-back housing to move to somewhere where there were parks, trees, playing fields must have been an extraordinary journey for these people. The trouble was that there was a street where maybe people had lived in for 100 years. Then all of a sudden you're moving them into a social programme. They're getting a new house. Their neighbours might be in 3 streets away, or the neighbours maybe never came.
Broadly speaking, I think they made a real hames of it. In the way that they built Rathcool, Turf Lodge, Tagmona, and they just split up the inner city districts and dispersed people off everywhere. Looking back on it now, there isn't any reason why they couldn't have had a phased development where they knocked the houses down at one section and got the people back into, like, you know, round the corner, and kept the same neighbours, broadly speaking, kept the sense of identity.
10 years earlier, at the beginning of this great change, the BBC captured the optimism of a generation who were told they had never had it so good. Rathcool, just outside Belfast, was a mega housing estate, and at one time, the biggest in Europe. It had been designed to solve the city's housing problem and offer young families a completely new start.
Rathcool to me was just a name. But when we came to Rathcool, it was one of those things that you said to yourself, this is where I want to live.
It was just a world of green, houses right up the drive, gardens in front of every house. Having your own space outside the house was lovely for me. We'd never had a garden. It was great fun learning, of course, what to put in them and how they would grow. And at first it was just houses, and then at the end of the houses would be another bigger house made into 2 flats. That was the flats. And then I think there was the flats that was built, as you see in the film, on a curve, and they were known locally as the banana flats. I mean, I was reared in a house with a yard at the back, and the toilet was out there. Getting the house in Rathcool with an indoor toilet and a bath was luxury.
To be able to go up and turn the hot water on, have a bath, close the door, and have such privacy, it was brilliant.
It was privacy, it was luxury, and there was never anybody rapping the door quickly to get in, to go to the loo and all sorts of things. But the bathroom was the one big luxury. I think it was the thing that I appreciated. The bathroom and then the garden. I think in that order.
So we chose to visit the Long family in Rathcool Drive, to go around with them a bit and see through their eyes something of what it's like to live on a housing trust estate.
Well, that's the way children were in those days. They had their wee coats on them, their hats, their scarves, their gloves.
You didn't go out just whatever way you wanted then. You went out dressed. and you had to have your gloves on. And it was just like my mommy seeing us out.
Mrs. Miller lives in Ardley Crescent, in an old people's house. Living room, kitchen, bedroom and bathroom. For just
that family would have been just the same as most families in Rathcool. Their children would have went and visited their grandmother and grandfathers, and they would have went and visited friends.
In the house they went to visit, the ornaments sitting in the window, and my mummy had one exactly the same. So it was just our home, except in a different place.
Other small houses are cunningly fitted into corner sites, like this Type D flat, where Anne Murray, the children's friend, lives.
When we moved in, it was a whole new area being redeveloped, so that the people all moved in together, and we made friends. And everybody was in the same boat, not very much money. And it was a community.
And Rathcool already has a focal point, in the big old Georgian house, where the housing manager's office is to be found.
That was a big estate at one time, and it became a home for lots of things. The doctor had a surgery there in one of the rooms, and it was just used as a community centre for quite a while.
Mrs. Long, the children's mother, is on her way shopping.
However, the optimism of the housing estates was short-lived. The onset of the Troubles in the late 1960s meant that many of the early promises would remain just that. But for those founding settlers who stayed and raised their families, Rathcool would always be home.
Well, I'm still living in the same house that I moved into, and I have no intentions of moving out.
I still like Rathcool. To me, it's home now, and to me, I have my friends. Still the same friends I made 47 years ago. I fought to stay, I saw the hard times, and I'm back with the good times. And I'll fall off the perch when I get there.
While most of us went about our day-to-day lives, far removed from a designer lifestyle with all the trimmings, one Belfast superstar was living the dream. A 1971 documentary gave us a tantalising glimpse into the home life of a Belfast football legend.
You know, George was, I always felt, our representative out there in the world that was swinging. I think there was an awful lot invested in George. It was always, my feeling was always, insofar as I could express it at the age of 9 or 10, you know, well, good on you. A wee bit of that is ours.
The most obvious symbol of Best's success is the uncompromisingly modern house he has had built on a hill outside Manchester.
George's house is so 1971, it's not true. Now you'd probably drive past it if it was still there and you'd think, whoa, what an atrocity, what a 70s disaster. But back then, 1971, that was just the house to have. The fact that you could drive in underneath the house and park your car, that's very cool, that's very persuaders. I mean, that is a cool house. Those mad arcing lights and the incredible touch button TV, a colour TV.
To have a push button anything in 1970, 71, you know, changing channels, you know, was still it was a day trip. You had to get up from the sofa and schlep across the room and turn it over and try and get it exactly right. It was like, you know, opening safes was easier.
And he's got this huge snooker table which fills the entire room. And it looks like the bedroom hasn't been touched at all. There's the old quilt, there's the old cover over the bed. George Best at that time is not only perhaps the greatest footballer in the world, he's also one of the best looking blokes in the world as well. And he's always happy to get the shirt off. This is a sex symbol, you know, and he's quite happy to show it off. George had it, and he was happy to flaunt it, and it's not just in the football pitch. He's looking good as he goes to the bath as well there, so fair play to him, he's got it, flaunt it. I love the bathroom. I love the fact that he has it in Manchester United colours. I love the fact that he has like a footballer's bath as well. It's like something from Old Trafford, and he's had it transported into his dream home. It's perfectly off the period. It's 1971, but I tell you what, if it was up for sale today and I could afford it, I'd move in and I'd be in that bath in seconds.
We're not sure if George Best took interior design inspiration from the Ideal Home exhibition. But thousands of house-proud locals couldn't resist the lure of this annual King's Hall extravaganza.
The Ideal Home exhibition at one stage would have been in everybody's social calendar. You know, you had to go to it. If you didn't go to the Ideal Home exhibition, you were missing something.
Whether you're like me and you're just here with no money to have a look, or whether you've actually come to buy something, there really is something for everybody.
It was one of the events of the year. Everybody went, really. Maybe people had a bit more disposable money for a change. They were starting to move on from where their parents might have been, and from a lot of that very utilitarian furniture that there would have been in the, certainly in the 50s.
That was sort of around the 1980s, people were realising, well, look, you know, there's a lot of innovation in here now. You know, I can do things to my house and, you know, make my house more lived in. I want to show off my house. I want to show off my avocado bathroom suite and things like that, and my new dining room table. And whereas there wouldn't have been that before. I think people were becoming more aware of style.
I think more importantly, people also wanted to dream. They wanted to see those things that they can't have. There's that through the keyhole thing. They want to see how the other half live and have something to dream about or aspire to.
And if you get a bit footsore while you're walking around the exhibition, well, you could always have a rest on something like this, which is a waterbed, for only £499.
It was the first time I'd ever seen a waterbed, actually. And it was fun bouncing around on it, I must say. £59, I thought that was a fortune. Can you imagine spending that on a bed? No wonder they didn't catch on.
That's the porridge in there. Very, very sticky and gooey and messy.
You had, of course, the what we call the demonstrators, and the demonstrators always added that little bit of theatre.
Now the egg we've got in the pan there, that's the egg cooked.
And they were always English and always, come over here. They were supposed to be like latter-day market traders, you know, and it was they you know, they made you really, how did you survive without having this apple segment or whatever it was?
No tin foil, no cellophane. It's not required.
They'd be selling something like a special cheese grater, or those things where you banged up and down and it was supposed to reduce your onion to very tiny little bits in no time, and it banged it up and down a few times. When you got it home, the whole thing fell apart.
Just as the 1980s declared the demise of dull and championed the birth of bling, Robinson's Builders, the family business behind the Centrepiece show home, saw room for improvement and put their money where their house was.
Well, it's very simple. For the last 7 years we have been involved in building the Ideal Home house, the central feature.
My father was always known as Joe Robinson, and Joe Robinson was a builder.
There would be a change in the ownership.
In 1981, we were offered the opportunity to buy the contract for the exhibition, and we agreed that we would borrow a serious amount of money. Then it was a serious amount of money to buy the contract.
The basic concept of the show is the same. We have to consider a lot of the people that like to come and don't like changes. But
the archive you have of the interview is a very proud Joe Robinson having got this exhibition together at a time when the exhibition had dipped considerably, and we knew, having been involved with show houses, that there was a lot of key exhibitors were going to pull out, and as I say, fools rush in. But we pulled it together. We pulled together a very credible exhibition, a very interesting exhibition, and that's the pride that he shows in the interview. We needed to generate publicity, we needed to generate media attention, and what we looked at was media personalities. celebrities, if you like, that might be of interest to the public at the time.
There's a fabulous range of products on display at the exhibition this year, and you might come up not knowing if you want a new kitchen knife or a whole new kitchen.
The presenters like to get involved, and it suited us to get involved too, and a very young Noel, I have to add, was seen sipping champagne in there with a very lovely young lady.
But what you really need is one of these, a California-style whirlpool jacuzzi bath. Invigorating, refreshing, guaranteed to get you perked up and speed up your metabolism in the morning. All for a mere £2,200. And if you happen to know one of the salesmen, there are some optional extras available that really do make it an ideal home. Cheers.
Noel Thompson, God bless him, sitting there with his glass of champagne. It was just so, and you know, and this girl, this model in the corner, who obviously wasn't allowed to speak.
It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it sometime. And yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of antics like that. It's all about generating publicity from our point of view, and that's what made the whole industry fun.
And as if finding BBC presenters in your hot tub wasn't enough, the best was still to come. For sitting at the heart of the King's Hall complex was the last word in luxury living. The must-see legendary show house.
The show house was always the focal part of the exhibition. We realised that you just don't put a little, what might be described as a 10-50 square foot bungalow in the middle. This has got to create the wow factor. The difficulty each year was to go better than the previous year. And you can never go better, you have to go different. If it's ultra-modern one year, you go very traditional the next year and vice versa. And you just keep creating a difference, and hopefully that difference is enough to create that perception of it being better than the previous year.
However, as tastes changed and new generations of house owners found faster ways to create their ideal homes, there was no longer the same need for the annual exhibition.
Consumers became more discerning. You had the emergence of shopping centres, you had the emergence of the retail parks.
I think the internet has just made everything instant. There's nothing new anymore. Whereas the Ideal Home exhibition would have been somewhere where you could have gone and got something really innovative, taken it home, shown it off to your friends. Now it's like, whatever, I've seen that.
To a generation, or to generations that perhaps aren't around anymore, the loss of it would have been quite massive to them. To younger generations, they don't even notice its existence having gone now.
What is also gone, and totally unknown to the younger generations, is the Northern Ireland that Richard Dimbleby explored in the 1950s. This is a forgotten portrait of our home that now only exists on film.
When you look at the Dimbleby film, made in 1954, that's the parents or the grandparents or the great-grandparents of most people. They're simple, and they're rural, and they're deferential, and they're old-fashioned, and they're hard-working, and that's what we've all come out of.
And that was the end of my Ulster journey.
Well, Richard, are you any wiser for your ambling?
I am that.
It's like a time capsule. It takes you back to the sort of feelings that people had and the way they talked.
Looking back at any films of that kind, I think that the real benefit of looking back is hearing those voices, what I like to call those echoes of the sacred that are passed down. Even though you might not know who said them, you know what was said.
Once upon a time.
The story of our homes, whether in the country, town or city, is also the story of how we used to live. And thanks to a rich archive and the magic of film, we can bring those bygone days back to life.
Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never.
Well, tonight, those were the days featured clips from About Britain, a journey in Northern Ireland. Originally broadcast in July 1954, the programme shows Richard Dimbleby visiting various beauty spots, ably advised by Joseph Tumilty. Digital viewers can press red now to see all of the original programme, and you can find more archive clips online. Follow the link at bbc.co.uk/ni.
Those were the days.